Good day, everybody. Quantum computation represents a threat to many cryptographic protocols in operation today. It has been estimated that by 2035, there will exist a quantum computer capable of breaking the vital cryptographic scheme RSA 2048. There are various technologies which rely heavily on cryptography or cryptographic controls, including blockchain, for many of the essential subroutines, and the list goes on and on. For today's session, we have a very interesting topic, which is, are today's encryption standards ready for quantum attacks? My name is Farooq Wahab Nair, and I'm a cybersecurity strategist and a cybersecurity leader in the public sector space. I have an esteemed list of panelists who are going to be joining us in today's discussion. So I will start off with a brief introduction of the panelists, and then we'll dive into the conversation. I would like to introduce the first panelist for today's session, Andrew Cheung. And Andrew, can you just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Nice having. Thank you for having me here. My name is Andrew Cheung. I am the CEO of 01 Communique. We have the IronCAP product, which is the post-quantum cybersecurity encryption and digital the signature the technology. So I'm very glad to be here today, together with our panelists.
Thank you, Andrew. Next up is Florin Filip.
Hi, everybody. My name is Florin Filip. I'm director of CGI Innovation Center in Montreal, and really glad to be with you today. In the Innovation Center, we are bridging, today's and tomorrow's not only technologies, but also ideas, creativity, innovation. And I think that talking about, quantum security is the right thing to do today.
Thank you. Next up is Ali Abbas Hirji.
Thanks, Farooq. Hey, everybody. You've seen me at the opening talk show. I'm Ali, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this session today with IronCAP. And thank you, Farooq and colleagues, for moderating. I work at Durham College, where I'm faculty, and I lead both the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation and the AI Hub. And one thing about me, I'll tell you, I'm not smart, but I know how to surround myself with smart people. So I know I'm in good company today. Very excited for this. Thanks, Farooq.
Thank you, Ali. Next up is Asif Qayyum.
Hi, Farooq. Thank you for having me. My name is Asif Qayyum. I'm a managing director at PwC. And the area of practice that I work for is emerging technologies and digital risk. And within digital risk, the area that I take care of is cybersecurity. And as the folks just mentioned here, today's topic is directly at the intersection of both emerging tech and cyber, and hence it greatly interests the practice that I come from and personally as an area of interest. Thank you, Farooq.
Thank you, Asif. Next up is Tyson.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tyson Macaulay. I'm here in Ottawa. Got about 27 years in cyber at this point, started on the internet in 92. A number of books to my credit, patents. I've worked in some big places like Intel, and I'm currently the Chief Security Officer and the VP of Field Engineering at Rockport. We're a next generation network company for high performance systems. And I'm actually coming at this from a very applied angle where we have to look at the security of these networks and the impact of quantum technologies on the fundamental plumbing for all of us.
Amazing. So we'll start off with the challenge statement. The challenge statement is that with mounting cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, such as oil and gas industries, banking, and healthcare platforms, our service providers prepare to react with a national warning against quantum attacks by adopting the next generation encryption protocols. And I put forward this challenge statement to Andrew from IronCAP. So take it away, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Farooq. Again, thank you for having us here. I'm very glad. A short answer to your question would be that the tidal wave of costly and disruptive cyber attacks is really costing our economy billions, yes, billions of dollars. Hackers basically locks up the victim's computer almost at will and demand ransom, which is a constant and scary reality these days. Just to name a few, everyone heard about the SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline, JBS, the entire Irish healthcare system, and the most recent Kaseya ransomware attack. The list just goes on. And this is just the start. And 9 out of 10 of these attacks basically launch with a very simple phishing email. The size and the sophistication and the frequency have basically red light flashing at governments and boardroom of corporations all over the world. It is all about to get worse, a lot worse. And this is because the fast approaching quantum computing will render current encryption systems such as RSA useless. Now, SolarWinds alone, that hacks alone, basically open up the database of literally hundreds of government agencies and huge companies. The Wall Street Journal reported that US agencies, including part of the Pentagon, the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, the Department of Energy, and the Treasury were all breached. And no wonder why. Then the US Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said, cyber attacks are now the foremost risk to the global financial system, even more so than the lending and liquidity risk that led to the 2008 financial crisis. And this truly elevates cyber attacks and ransomware from simply criminal activities to virtually national security level. In other words, cybersecurity is now front and center. With the massive funding by all nation-state players on top of the criminals, cyber attacks are getting bigger and more sophisticated. This is an equivalent of almost like a cyber Cold War. In addition to that, cyber threats using quantum computing power are now within reach and represent a whole new paradigm, as virtually all our existing encryptions are basically threatened. As mentioned a little earlier, that quantum computing has advanced rapidly with a huge number of technical advances, and nation states are investing billions of dollars every year into this research category. Forbes basically reported that the National Science Foundation, NSF, and the Department of Energy, DOE, announced the investment of more than $1 billion over the next 5 years for quantum information science, QIS, centers. Quantum encryption and quantum hacking are simply a significant subset of that. Now, with the past year that brought cyber threat to the front page, basically, the merging of cyber threat and quantum computing is not at all well understood by the public. We are basically nowhere near prepared for the fact that quantum computing power will render current encryption systems such as RSA totally obsolete and leave data unprotected. We at 01 or IronCAP, we saw this coming 5 years ago and invested time, money in IronCAP, which is the first to market quantum safe encryption, and is proven secure and commercially available today. With the basically with the arrival of quantum, as mentioned a little earlier, RSA-2K is broken fundamentally. And while there is still debate over when Q day arrives, like Q day is defined as the day when the bad guys are using quantum computer to do the dirty works, right? So while there's still debate over when that day would come, it is very important to remember that not all quantum computing development is made public. In other words, we will not be aware of the first quantum hack until it is too late. Even more distressing is that the hackers are already intercepting highly sensitive but encrypted information, and then they store it for future crack using quantum computers. In other words, it is already late in the game. As quantum computing becoming more commercially available, they will be used to break the encryption that protects the stolen data. So I think I have said, enough of the background about this challenge. And today, I'm very happy to have our expert panelists. They will basically discuss furthermore in details about how the industry perceives the arrival of quantum computing and how we can prepare for the soon-to-arrive quantum threat. So thank you, and we'll go into the panel discussion.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for setting the context for this session. And I think it's pretty much clear that be it the state actors or the non-state actors, the quantum-based attacks are taking its toll, and we'll see more of them in the future. So with that, I'd like to move over to our panelists, and my first question would be to Florin. And the question is that, Florin, you are an expert of both the worlds, and the traditional banking world and the new blockchain world. So pretty interesting. I mean, the blockchain world is surrounding the fintech space and all the payment space and is disrupting that whole space. So you are an expert in both these areas. So how are your traditional banking clients viewing cybersecurity and the quantum threat? And how are new blockchain clients addressing the quantum threat with blockchain endpoints being vulnerable?
Thank you, Filip. So first of all, based on everything that Andrew said, I think that it's obvious that one of the first elements of this quantum threat and one of the first targets is the financial system. And that's why when we talk about clients in banking, we have to keep in mind that banking today is actually an ecosystem. So what's happening is not only the bank by itself, is the bank with all the elements, mobile banking, e-commerce, merchants, everything that has to do with even the third party, the fintech partners, the digital certificates, and the information exchange that is happening on the backbone between, for instance, central bank, commercial banks, between commercial banks, and so on. So when we talk about ecosystem, we talk about multiple entry points. We talk about different encryption algorithms. And if we take into consideration that, for instance, one of the critical points and probably one of the first to be under attack by quantum computers is the asymmetrical encryption. And keep in mind that the digital certificates, the digital signatures are based on asymmetric keys. So those elements will be, and that's what we see. Those elements will be probably the first one, to have the attention from the financial institutions. What we see in the market is that there are a couple of elements and there are a couple of actions that all the financial institutions, are taking. And I mean about, assessing, for instance, future and retroactive risks. And it's interesting because we think most of the time we think, quantum computing, future risk. The reality is that every and each document that is stored today, somewhere on a system for a financial institution is actually a potential document that is under attack. And most of the time we use those documents in order, of course, to do other transactions, other interactions. So the retroactive risk is really, really very, very interesting. The other element that we see is that, most of the financial institutions, they are taking an inventory of their, cryptographic algorithms. And this is not an easy, task, because you need to look inside the organization. You need to look at, the third party. You need to look at all the interactions today that are secure. For instance, the interaction with an ATM is, based on a private network. So this is also very vulnerable to an attack. So all those elements, all those, type of algorithms that used today, you need to take that, in inventory to do that. And after that, once those two first steps are done, you actually need to, to build the cryptographic agility. And what we see is that, it's much easier to say build cryptographic agility than to actually, realize it. And that's where you have, components where when we talk about, post-quantum computing algorithms that can help an organization to do that, to actually create that, cryptographic agility that is so important. Also, what we see, and, I will say that today in the market, there are like three components. There are like three stages: awareness, exploration, and experimentation. And you see that, most of the organizations are looking at, left to right to see what the others are doing. And there are some very interesting public, examples there. and all our clients are asking, okay, what the others are doing, how they are doing it. And you see things like, ICBC or the People's Bank of China, that they are already using, quantum key distribution, based on the satellite communication in order to exchange information. So when you look at, quantum key distribution and you look at post-quantum computing algorithms, you say, hey, probably not necessarily all the financial institutions will have, all the resources necessary in order to build a quantum key distribution network, for instance, for them and to secure it. So what are the other alternatives there? That's really interesting, and that's where we see a lot of organizations like UBS, JP Morgan, Barclays, that they are forging some sort of quantum ecosystem relations in order to actually experiment with the quantum technologies. So that experimentation, I think that for some organization, it's real. What I will end with that for this part of the question. What I think that is important is that to understand that the time to act is now. The time to act is now, because what's happening is that you will pay the price in the future of not acting now. It's as simple as that, and that's where I think that we see those three elements, that you're assessing, the risk, taking the inventory, and, building the cryptographic agility. What we don't see, and there are not necessarily yet in place, are, all the migration plans. And those probably, this is the next, for me, this is the next level. This is actually what needs to happen is, okay, now I understand where I am, what is, actual state, future state, how I get there. And that's where actually the things are getting a little bit messy, where when you look how you move, to the next step. But again, my main message here is time to act is now. Look at what are the options, even before, there is a standard. We know that, there are some standards. Etsy has some, standards there available. There will be a standard in North America available in 2024. So even before that, there are options, there are solutions. For your second part, okay, blockchain. I think that when we think blockchain, first of all, we need to look at multiple aspects. The one is the evolution of blockchain. Yes, blockchain was, put in place as a secure distributed ledger, and parts of that, yes, is secure. But blockchain, it's also based, on ecliptic curve, so that it's an asymmetric encryption scheme. So there are vulnerabilities there also. When we talk blockchain, we also need to talk about, and to look at how the blockchain will evolve. So we already have technologies there like quantum distributed ledger. We also have, approaches that we think about, quantum money. That is a very elegant and nice way to actually, jump from everything that has to do with digital currencies, with Bitcoin today, directly on the quantum, money. But I still think that blockchain is a very, I won't say necessarily mature, but is mature if you look at, how long it took to actually put it in the market. But I think that is a technology that has a lot to provide. And I think that, again, using like post-quantum algorithms in order to secure all kind of, entry points and the endpoints, that will also provide an organization that is deploying blockchain today with that leading edge. I also think that if you deploy today blockchain, you need to put in place, some sort of quantum safetiness. You cannot just, go deploying blockchain today and say, hey, look, I will look into that tomorrow. I think that, again, the main message here is you have to start now, and you have to start somewhere. If you don't do that, what's happening is that in the future, you will need to actually remember what I said about the retroactive all the retroactive risks. So if you don't embed today quantum security in blockchain, you will need to have a plan how you deal with retroactive risks. And there is also another element that is interesting, and sometimes we forget it because it's so obvious that we don't see, we don't see the forest because of the tree, is that remember that in blockchain, when you use blockchain, there are no backups. You cannot take that information and, okay, let's put it back. So when you have a block there, when you have a distributed information that was in any way, tampered, that was hacked, what's happening is that that block is lost. So think about how much you lose if you don't, look at the quantum security, if you don't look at quantum safetyness, if you don't look at, encryption schemes that are actually protecting you for tomorrow. So those are a couple of elements, of course, that we can, the blockchain and especially the financial aspect dealing with, quantum security, it's so large that it will be almost, mission impossible to deal with it in a couple of minutes. But I think that for me, those are the key elements if we look today at, those key components in the market.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Florin. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that the financial sector, especially the tier one banks, need to keep up with the winds of change as it relates to quantum computing. And I believe the world of blockchain is already relying on that, be it blockchain, be it quantum computation or quantum safety and security. So thanks a lot for your words of wisdom. I would like to direct the next question to Ali Abbas Hirji. And the question is from the other side of the world, which is about insights into the private and public sector in the United Arab Emirates, and how are they keeping up with the approaching readiness with quantum computing, and what steps can they take to become quantum safe? So Ali, over to you.
Thanks, Farouk. And Farouk, it's ironic you're asking me about UAE because a lot of what I've learned about work in the UAE was during your formative years there as well. So I think you have a lot of perspective to share on this. So next time I'll make sure I'm a moderator, and I'd love to hear from you. But I'll take a couple of seconds and summarize what I think is a good approach to your question. There are multiple ways to look at this, but I'll take one optic. And that is when you look at the UAE right now, especially in the capital Abu Dhabi, I'm sure many folks who are listening right now are aware that the UAE is making significant investments in academia and in applied research partnerships. Now, specifically in the UAE, about 6 months ago, they did open up their first quantum computing institute. This was in collaboration with a university in Barcelona, and I believe it's called the Technology Innovation Institute that they have assembled in Abu Dhabi that is specifically intended to do two things. At first, it's made to build their first quantum computing environment with a very unique approach to qubits, so on and so forth, and basically the hardware component of what goes into quantum computing. But secondly, part of their priorities is around security. What I like about what's happening in the UAE is, and the one thing that I will factor in, is that the UAE recognizes this as an area of research. I don't know if I fully say that this is the next preeminent threat from a computing perspective. However, the UAE has begun to recognize this as an area of research, but they're doing it from the perspective of they recognize their geographical location. They recognize the kind of threats that are hitting, for example, critical infrastructure, and this day is dedicated to critical infrastructure. With the UAE's recent friendship and diplomatic ties with Israel, for example, the UAE is going to face a new barrage of different attacks, specifically targeting some of their critical infrastructure pieces and their physical cyber assets. So I think from that perspective, the UAE has taken the right steps, not only from a perspective of let us research quantum computing, but also from a perspective of what can we do now from a securitization perspective. These academic partnerships that the UAE is building, I think will place them very strong. Not only with the University of Barcelona, but as many of you know, just a couple of weeks ago, probably a month ago, the UAE announced the Golden Visa. And part of that was to attract interests from folks who are in security, who are in data analytics, who are in artificial intelligence. and bringing them to the UAE and giving them residency in the country. I think this is where you begin to realize that the country is taking the right steps to prepare. This field is very, very new in terms of how we're talking about it from a security perspective, but it's been around for quite a while. I think the UAE is building the right ecosystem, to quote both Andrew and Florin, in order to research and develop homegrown solutions. I do feel that they're well positioned. They're attracting a lot of interest from individuals, but I do believe that if they follow a very similar ecosystem like we have in Canada around research funding, especially if they're getting more people into their citizenry cohort, I think that funding and those programs will really present the UAE and the Middle East as a whole powerhouse when it comes to research and security, but especially around quantum computing. The last thing that I will say with respect to this is, in my opinion, from what I see happening in the UAE and what I've spoken to a couple of folks over there in preparation for this session, the UAE is also spending a lot of time looking at how you can scale access to quantum compute. And that, as all of you remember from CES 2020, when IBM announced the potential of a commercially available quantum computer, timelines were still out into the future. If the UAE starts to take some steps to look at the commercialization of quantum compute, I think you will find a lot happening there when it comes to securitization and when it comes to research in this field. So for lack of a better word, I think IronCAP is well positioned to take a local solution global. They're going to globalize if they follow the right steps. Farooq, those are my 2 rupees of thought. Back to you.
Thank you, Ali. And quite recently, I've been in touch with the central bank of UAE and some players in the fintech space. And guess what they're working on? They're working on quantum computing. And I think we can probably have a session on that, on some of the new stuff happening in UAE, especially in the banking and payment sector.
I vote to moderate,
So
but you got to be a panelist on that, Farooq. You have a lot to offer.
Yeah, for sure. I'll do that, for sure. Thank you, Ali. And good to hear what's happening on the other side of the world. So let's come back to North America now. And I would like to direct my next question to Asif Qayyum, who is currently associated with my former organization. So the question to Asif is about his enterprise clients. So how are the enterprise clients viewing the quantum threat in Canada, and what are the key consideration for quantum safe readiness, in particular for leaders of critical infrastructure, which seems to be the latest target? So your views on public services such as the healthcare industry, on any other critical infrastructure that you or sector which you might be servicing?
Yeah, thank you, Farooq. Appreciate the question. So, Farooq, I think that there's a common theme of what everyone's commenting here, right? And I reflect on what Andrew said, what Florin was saying, what Ali just mentioned, that I think these recent cyber attacks have become, so there's like an intersection of many things happening right now. One, what has happened is that with the COVID push, there's a huge sudden surge on digitization. So we see users who are not that cyber savvy. We see a lot of, catalyzing force into moving everyone to be digital. On the other hand, we also see a lot of these cyber attacks coming in, a few of those were mentioned. And we literally see now new breaches being announced like every day by companies who were seemingly unreachable, right? And so what is actually happening is that I think there is a more and more awareness within enterprise, large and small alike, that what were seemingly far high impact, low probability events are becoming real, right? And COVID itself is such a potent example of an impact of an event which basically has low probability, perhaps once every 50 years, but has such a high impact that it really changes the whole global landscape of how people look and address that particular risk component. Now, what's actually happening is that I was reflecting on Andrew's statement where he said that there is still work to be done in helping people understand and bridge that gap between how do they look at quantum threat. And the reality is that technology doesn't have an ethical compass, right? Like take aviation, for example, like when aircrafts were invented, while it has a huge impact on having positive impact on humanity in terms of transportation, logistics, migrations, it is also one of the most lethal war tools that were ever invented by mankind. So it's the case with quantum computing, right? Like understanding the quantum threats. Now, what we are actually seeing and observing is that sectors which basically rank higher on the cyber maturity spectrum, right? Take defense, for example, financial services, right? Those are the enterprises or organizations in those sectors who are becoming more and more aware of this and are asking the right questions, right? And basically trying to position themselves to be ready for that, right? And the guidance that is out to them is that you not just have a view of whether it is a component, it is a responsibility of the IT department. For those organizations, we are seeing this emerging to almost become like a board level issue, right? An audit committee level issue. That are you basically aware of what there is, just so that at a cohesive level, these enterprises are able to address quantum readiness planning, quantum impact assessment, and quantum risk management strategies, right? In order to then enable and understand. Now, in terms of readiness planning, it just goes back to the fundamentals. First, triage your data systems. Make sure the timeliness. How long is the data which needs to be out there, right? And then making sure that what steps that you can take which can impact the quantum cryptanalysis less scalable for the adversary. Like these are the core fundamental thinkings. And for example, I mean, even organizations right now, as simple as moving to a TLS 1.3 for your cloud and web services, just to make it more difficult for adversary to execute a quantum attack at scale. So primarily, doing, as Florin was saying, doing a deep-rooted analysis as to what your landscape looks like, just so that once you archive all of those, cryptography in your enterprise, you can do an impact assessment and then basically look at what those strategies are. However, one thing is for sure, that everyone is realizing that the Q-day might have already occurred, right? It's just that it is now coming up, and because, a breach that could have happened on a database which is encrypted but lying somewhere there, as soon as that readiness or availability of that technology comes into the hand of these adversarial players, that is going to explode multifold. But I think there's no doubt that more and more they're understanding that you have to action it right now. On the healthcare services, the reality is that everyone understands what the threat is, the PHI data, the amount of data that flows through those systems. But on the other hand, I think there's a huge realization, especially I think on this forum and the majority of the people here, is that we've seen that is kind of the lowest hanging fruit there. And then we've seen that a lot of infiltration of IoT devices, right, in terms of telehealth, wherever there's remote connectivity, different devices that are being connected. It almost seems that the cybersecurity and then the quantum threat defense by design kind of comes in pretty lower down there. So even on those mature organizations who are looking into their vendor management strategies, there's a higher emphasis on making this as part of the questions that you ask, that, hey, what is your post-quantum threat readiness plan? And how do you plan to look into that so that you take these areas into consideration while planning that? Thanks, Farooq. I hope that answers the question.
Sure does, Asif. Thank you for sharing your views. I'd like to move on to Tyson now. So we all are aware of cyber risks today, and quantum is on the radar for sure. You've been advising billion-dollar private equity funds on cybersecurity. So how are they valuing their cybersecurity readiness risks, and are they actually thinking about quantum safe encryption?
Excellent question. The cybersecurity risks associated with investing right now, I'd say, are very high profile because of some of the incidents that Andrew mentioned at the very beginning. And there is certainly pressure to have cyber awareness at the board level. No longer is it sufficient just to have generalists at the board level or accountants at the board level. They want somebody who understands something about cyber. And that certainly is, there's a lot of merit to that. I'd also say that there's also probably, I don't want to say cynical, but an opportunistic angle when it comes to investing, where companies that maybe had a minor in cybersecurity are now being asked to convert that to a major in cybersecurity. And the reason being is that the valuations are higher, the multiples can be significantly higher. And at the same time, customers want that. They want to know that what they're buying, even if it's being branded as a secure thing or a secure product, but at least some thought has gone into it, because there's lots of bad security out there, particularly in the world of IoT and industrial IoT. Bad was the default setting when it came to security, and in some cases, it continues to be the default setting. So they want to see awareness, they want to see opportunities, and I'd also add that from an operational perspective, the notion of cybersecurity is becoming more and more prominent because of changes to regulation by market makers. And if you look at the U.S. government is a great example. The U.S. government is so large, because it includes the U.S. DoD, that it makes markets for customers. And they are coming out with more and more stringent cybersecurity related to their procurement. It's through something called CMMC. And this impacts not only the vendors, but their supply chains. And in the end, just about anybody who's selling a good or a service in North America will probably see questions around cybersecurity. And of course, CMMC derives from many of the NIST standards, and NIST is setting standards for the US government around post-quantum security. And while there's still, it appears to be a few years away, that's all going to trickle up through the supply chain regulations, which is going to impact the market makers, which is going to impact the companies that are trying to sell into those environments. And I think that since we're talking about quantum, one of the biggest quantum risks is not so much that a quantum computer or an effective quantum computer becomes available in an unexpected time frame. I think it's more that there's a regulatory event which requires people to have cryptographic inventories, to understand cryptographic agility and be able to implement it. And it takes them by surprise. And not only that, but the questions that they have to answer are not just about themselves, but about their supply chain. And this supply chain can be from services, like secure email. Is it quantum safe? Is there crypto agility in that product? As a CSO, you might have never thought to answer that question, all the way down to the types of things that are embedded in the components you buy from third parties. And another example, in my business, we make network devices, and we have a supply chain. And I've gone to the trouble of trying to understand where the cryptography is and how long the keys are and what is the nature of them. And I can tell you that it's a mixed bag. There's symmetric, there's asymmetric, and when I talk about symmetric, I include the hashes, not just the crypto ciphers themselves. And you have to understand what is good, what is not. It's a very complex process. And to go back to your original question, are investors asking questions about cryptographic agility and quantum safety? Not really. But is it increasing? Is it taking on a prominence in the answer that they're eventually looking to get? Sometimes from people like me. In summation, absolutely it is, because I could tell you that when that regulatory switch starts to flip or starts to tip, there's going to be a panic, and things are going to get done poorly, and things are going to break, and there will be liability. And it might have nothing to do with the failure of the cryptography. It'll be about the implementation of it. And I'd also like to offer a further comment. We talked about critical infrastructure. One of the poorest understood areas when it comes to critical infrastructure is critical infrastructure interdependency. How does one sector rely upon another sector? And how does a failure in one sector impact another sector? Ultimately, you have some supercritical infrastructures, telecoms, power, and finance. And of those, finance is probably the most fragile because it is ultimately very dependent on telecoms. If the telecoms networks go down, there are no more financial services to deliver. And everything from the handshakes used in consumer SSL transactions to the keys exchanged during SSH for remote administration on telecom infrastructure, it's all using symmetric crypto. And right now, the RFPs that are going out the door, they don't even include language around cryptographic agility, let alone quantum safety. So all of these things are going to come up because, the critical infrastructures like food, for instance, and health, for instance, which have sort of a lower cyber capability and awareness and maturity, are all heavily dependent on these other sectors like telecom and finance. And if something happens to them, then you're not going to be able to buy food in the grocery store, or your health records are going to get compromised. And it's a big, complicated picture. The investors, again, going back to what you're asking about, they want to be aware of it. They don't have granular understanding of it, but they are looking for companies that can reflect a maturity in this area to reassure them, certainly, even if they're not cyber companies. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Tyson, I would surely agree with you on the point that you made about critical infrastructure. In fact, in my view, critical infrastructure such as power distribution, utilities, is perhaps more fragile than the financial sector. Look what happened to the Colonial Pipeline. Look what happened to the water treatment plant in Florida, and the list goes on and on. So that's what keeps the CISOs up at night, or the CSOs up at night. So yeah, that's some scary tough stuff over there. So thank you for sharing your words of wisdom. So we'll now move on to the next part of today's panel discussion, which is going to be the panelists now directing their questions to Andrew from IronCAP. I would like to hand it over to Asif to ask the first question.
Sure. Thanks, Farooq. So, Andrew, I think I have two questions, like kind of concatenated of sort, right? I mean, one is, of course, I think reflecting on what Tyson just mentioned as well, like what is the time frame that you're seeing for organizations migrating to a quantum safe solution set, right? And I mean, kind of that is once they decide that the threat is real, because I mean, there is so much of already plumbing in place for security. So I mean, what's your view on that? And the other thing is that I had related to specific to the offering that IronCAP has is that, as you know, I mean, everyone in the industry does rely on standards and regulations. So how does the offering fit into the NIST landscape? So these are kind of a bit of a broader question base that I wanted to ask, just for the understanding as to what the offering is about. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Asif. I think these are very good questions. They are loaded questions, but they're really, really good questions. So I will answer them one by one. First of all, I will answer about the time frame, the migration kind of path, how complicated it is or how simple it is. So a short answer first is that, like, typically the migration is a simple process because they are basically in a very high level point of view. It is a replacement of the crypto engine, right, to a quantum safe crypto engine. However, some specific environments such as blockchain, I think Florin mentioned a little bit earlier too about the blockchain. It could be more challenging than other. Like blockchain, for example, it has a block of data typically signed by the creator, and therefore blockchain will need to either recreate the whole chain or forking a new one, or both of which are a really painful and challenging process. And however, for some other environment, it is typically a simple process only involving replacing the underlying cryptographic engine, such as the RSA engine, because IronCAP is compatible with existing API the systems, such as the PKCS11, the OpenPGP, those kind of things, right? But then, in my opinion, I think often in IT, especially IT within a large organization, the higher challenge would be the process, like the evaluation process, rather than the technical implication, which is a lot simpler than the process. So I think that basically is an indication that technically is actually quite simple, other than some very specific environments such as blockchain. And but the process is a long one, and this is also echoed by what Asif says, that the timing for Q-Day might have arrived already, because it takes so much time for a company to plan and act, to become quantum safe. So that's basically the time frame. And then on the other side, it is related, like your second question is kind of related to the first one about how long it would take to implement, because they are standard. Usually company would depend on some kind of standard. The tricky part today is that there's really no standard yet. Like even NIST has started the recommendation process a few years ago. They have only gone through 3 rounds of the recommendation, of they call the evaluation, or someone called the elimination process to finalize the recommendation. And they likely won't have the recommendation until at least 2023 or even 2024. And the problem is, even after they have the recommendation, it still takes time to come up with the standard, like the FIP standard and things like that. So we recognize that kind of a very particular challenging situation a few years ago. And what we forecast that at that time was that Q-Day would arrive before, or maybe way before, NIST has the final recommendation. So what we have done at IronCAP is that we are kind of skillfully taking the benefit from both worlds. So when we started 5 years ago, we kind of predicted that, as I mentioned, Q-Day would arrive before the recommendation. So we chose to leverage our knowledge to predict what the NIST winner would be, and created our API based on our prediction. So in the NIST process, there are mainly 5 categories: the code-based encryption category, lattice-based, hash-based, multivariate-based, and supersingular elliptic curve isogeny. And NIST is planning to make 1 recommendation in each category. And we have predicted that Gopper and Sphinx to be the winner in the code-based and hash-based category, and took the lead to create IronCAP based on these 2 methods. So after now 3 rounds in the NIST evaluation process, a very interesting thing happened, was that, as expected, Gopper and Sphinx are the candidate, but they are the only candidate left in the code-based and hash-based category, while there are several remaining candidates in other categories, and require several more rounds to complete the elimination process. So in other words, our prediction was bang on, and from this point on, it is kind of like betting with only 1 horse in the race. And the 2 methods used in IronCAP are already a sure win in the NIST process, giving our customers a clear early mover advantage without having to wait for the final recommendation from NIST. So that's a long-winded answer to complete your 2-part question: that how long it would take, and what's the process, and what happened when there's really no standard yet. So there is the kind of way that we handle that particularly very challenging and tricky situation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Andrew, that was really helpful, because I mean, in the industry perspective, you can't fully appreciate that just having that understanding for broadly across the enterprise is kind of critical to explain as to why a solution set does fit into the alignment to what is coming down the pike from NIST. So thank you, appreciate that response. Thanks, Farooq, back to you, please.
Thank you. And for the next question, I'd like to hand it over to Tyson.
Yeah, Andrew, there aren't a lot of organizations that are universally applying PQC, but the ones that are leading the way for us. And I'd be interested to know if you see a particular industry vertical is leading in the adoption or at least the migration towards post-quantum cryptography. And then what are their use cases? And more specifically around the use cases, are they doing it because they think it's the right thing to do and Q-Day is here or nearly here, or are they doing it because of regulatory and compliance reasons? In other words, purely business reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tyson, for this question. Fundamentally, the application of PQC, post-quantum cryptography, is very broad, as we all know. Examples are email security, financial transactions, money transfer, blockchain, 5G IoT devices security, website security, auto industry. The list just goes on. And they are all already some very solid early adapter use cases. First of all, actually it is from ourselves that we have created a product called IronCAP X, which is an email security product that is really the world's first quantum safe end-to-end email security product with encryption and digital signature feature. It is quantum safe because it is using the IronCAP engine and it is already digital the signature ready. And it is end-to-end, so the middle security hole has been eliminated as because the email doesn't stay in any third-party server, including our own server. And it is encryption is encryption capability ensures your email, even stolen by hackers, cannot be read without your private key. Even the hacker uses the power of quantum computer today and in the future. And finally, probably the most important part is that the digital signature, the quantum safe digital signature, ensure easy and clear distinguishment between a legit and a phishing email, which we earlier talked about. The phishing is the fundamental source of the biggest problem happening these days. So so with these, is the first use cases is basically provided by us. Is already commercially available that any one of us here can come to the IronCAP website to download and try. And in addition to that, there's another example, like a fintech customer of us in Asia has successfully using IronCAP to create the world first quantum safe Bitcoin ATM machine. As mentioned a little bit earlier, that blockchain by itself is secure and even is still secure in the post-quantum era. However, the endpoints are not, right? The endpoints being the wallet, the mining, they are just regular computer protected by current encryption system, which will be broken by quantum computing. So as a early adapter mover, that fintech customer in Asia has created, again, the quantum safe Bitcoin ATM machine, and is now currently rolling out in Asia. And finally, there's another customer that we have in Edinburgh base. They have the auto industry as their customer. As we all know, that auto industry has a very long product planning timeline, longer than a lot of other products, from the design to often a few years, rolling out security, and then the user will use it for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. So for sure, when a car is the future car is in design, they have to take into consideration of quantum safe, because for sure it will go beyond Q-Day. That car would definitely go beyond Q-Day. So whether you're talking about autonomous car you're talking about just the key itself. Now the key has gone through to the first generation physical key, to a fob, now to a third generation of fobless things using your thumb, your fist, or your retina as the digital identity. They have to consider quantum safe security, and they are applying IronCAP to this new generations of cars. So those are the immediate use case that I can give an example to kind of like illustrate a little bit how different very broad different kind of industry are preparing themselves for that coming quantum threat.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Tyson and Andrew, and for the last question, Ali, over to you.
All right, so Andrew, I did have a question on GOPA code, but you seem to have spoken to it quite a bit, so well done there. Very quickly, you've referenced ecosystems quite a bit. And I also spoke a little bit at the start about the lack of commercial availability of computing. What kind of test beds and sandboxes tested your encryption against? Because myself, when I was to make purchase, I'd look for some of those quote unquote testimonials. What kind of evidence-backed making can you support with when it comes to the quality of your encryption stack?
Well, in fact, this is a very, very good technical question. So it also very tricky too, because encryption is a very interesting industry, that the encryption technology are all assumed safe until someone has a mathematical cracking theory. You don't even need to really physically break the encryption. All you need is a mathematical cracking theory that the academic world or the high-tech world has adopted, that this is a theory, then it's considered to be broken already. So the most important test in a cryptography, in other words, becoming the time testing nature rather than the physical cracking. So the GOPA code base is actually having been in the academic world for almost 50 years without a single mathematical cracking theory. And the rest of the standard or the method being considered by the NIST process, they are like 20 years or less. And particularly the GOPA code base has been in the world for almost 50 years, again, without a single mathematic cracking theory. So that is the single most important test, for GOPA code base. Now, I'm sure that you probably also other audience would have a question now in their mind. Then, okay, so if GOPA code is so good, almost as old as the RSA, how come the world has adopted to RSA 40 years ago, but not GOPA code base if it is so good? And the answer is very, very simple too. Like GOPA code base has a disadvantage. And this disadvantage is that it requires a large public key of 250K. Now, if I tell my son about this, he would laugh at me because this so-called large public key is smaller than 1/10 of one of his music file. But well, don't forget, while 250K is a drop in the ocean today, it is larger than the memory space of a complete computer system 40 years ago. So that was not feasible at that time versus only 4 kilobit of the RSA public key. So most importantly, there's no quantum computer too at that time. So the world has adopted to what was practically available and still safe, theoretically at that time. So this is now, that was then, this is now, and we are at the verge of post-quantum computing era. So the world is this time, for a change. So I hope that would answer a little bit of the background about how come like GOPA code is so much proven, and then but it wasn't, kind of receiving commercial attention until just now.
Oh, I think that was brilliant. It calls for more sessions, so thank you for that. Farooq, back to you, boss.
Thank you, and I think we are at the hour now, just in time. So I'd like to thank all the panelists. Florin unfortunately had to leave, but thank you to Florin, Asif, Tyson, and Andrew from IronCAP. And I learned a lot from today's session about the quantum challenges for today and for tomorrow. So thank you all for today's session. And Looking forward to further discussions on this topic.
Guys,
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So-
Cheers, guys.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.